Hello everyone, my name is Isabella and welcome to my channel, Between the Pages. I don't have my mics and I'm at my mom's. And one of her dogs is right here beside me and breathing very heavily, so if you hear him at all, forgive me. Anyways, today I'm drinking a raspberry sherbet Olipop. This is what the can looks like. I put it in a cup, a Buc-ee's cup, with ice because I wanted it to be cold. It's not bad. I wish it had a little bit more of a sherbet flavor because I really like sherbet. You can definitely taste the raspberry. I don't hate it. I think I like it pretty well. I will say Olipops, if you try to put them up against like Coke or Pepsi or Dr. Pepper, it's not going to be as good if you're used to drinking full sugar sodas, because you can't really compete with like actual sugar compared to a drink with only 30 calories. 2 grams of sugar in this whole can, and Coke has like 60 or probably more than that. So it doesn't technically compete, except for, in my opinion, some of them are like really good, like the ginger ale Olipop. If you like the taste of ginger and you like ginger ale, try the ginger ale Olipop. It is so good. You can taste the ginger, and it's so much better. It doesn't compete with any other ginger ale drink I've ever had. I like the grape one. I think that's still my all-time favorite because it's literally carbonated grape juice. And I like carbonated drinks. So, this one was given to me by my secret sister. She came through with all of her gifts. And she gave me the crisp apple one, which I haven't tried yet. I don't remember trying it. And if it tastes like apple juice carbonated, like the grape one does grape juice, that's gonna be the end for me. It's gonna be so good. Anyways, I do like Olipops though, as like a healthier soda alternative. I do like Olipops. A little bit better than Poppies. I used to like Poppies. I may still drink some of them depending on what flavors, but I think I like Olipops a little bit better now. Anyways, I'm not gonna rant about soda. Let's get into the actual video. So today I am going to be reviewing the Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is the censored version. I was not aware that there was a censored and an uncensored version until I was like in the middle of this book. So there's that. So the censored version has 209 pages, 20 chapters. Obviously that depends on like the font size and everything. My copy has 209 pages, definitely 20 chapters. The uncensored version has only 13 chapters. I will get into that later. But the summary says the horror, whatever it was, had not yet entirely spoiled that marvelous beauty. That is a quote from the book, I believe. Enthralled by his own exquisite portrait, Dorian Gray exchanges his soul for eternal youth and beauty. Influenced by his friend, Lord Henry Wotton, he is drawn into a corrupt double life, indulging his desires in secret while remaining a gentleman in the eyes of polite society. Only his portrait bears the traces of his decadence. I think it's how you say that. I'm pretty sure it is. It's just I've never heard that word used in this context. I do think I looked up the word just to make sure when I wrote this down, but I don't remember exactly what it said. Anyways, that's not the point. So I read the censored version. This is the censored version. So everything I say explicitly about this book and what I read is the censored version. Once again, I will get into it in just a minute. But this book explores the reality. I don't know if that's the right word. Let's stick with reality. But y'all may know what I'm meaning. I may know of a better word. But this book explores the reality of moral decay, what happens when you live only for your own pleasure, the pursuit of eternal youth at the expense of one's soul, consequences of living a life of indulgence and moral corruption. I just kind of like jotted all of that down, not with correct grammar. Now, the possible triggers in this book, the censored version, I want to make that very clear. There are deaths, quite a few, 3, 4, 5, who knows. There is suicide types of deaths. And I think I can say that on YouTube. It's just going to be demonetized, but I'm not even monetized to begin with, so it doesn't matter. And by murder. So there's suicide and there's murder. And there's an accidental murder, like an accidental one. There are talks of opium dens and describe the look people had on their faces, although not in terrible detail. It just describes how they have vacant looks on their faces and they're just staring off into space because they are on drugs. So, general hints at immoral behavior, but it does not go into detail. So much so that I was wondering what it was talking about. It didn't even really mention enough for you to know what it was talking about. Like, there's some people whose, like, reputations kind of change and get tarnished, but it never really says in what ways their reputation was tarnished. Now, the conversations in this book, very theological, psychological, philosophical, all of those awful words. And I wrote, I don't agree a lot of what is said, but Lord Henry Wotton is the one who said most of them, or Dorian Gray, but he learned a lot and parroted a lot of what Lord Henry Wotton said. And he's presented as a sort of immoral bad guy, talking about Lord Henry Wotton and Dorian Gray. Lord Henry is just moral enough that he has high social standing, but a lot of his theological and philosophical opinions are very jaded, cynical, selfish, or apathetic. So, the person who paints Dorian Gray's picture is Basil Hallward. I think it is an H word. I can't remember his last name. It starts with an H. But Basil, and it is pronounced basil, like the herb, or herb, however you want to say it. And that's how I've pronounced it. Who knows if you're meant to pronounce it another way. But Basil paints the picture of Dorian Gray. And he is a very, like, moral, upstanding guy. A little bit of a recluse. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you this book, the writing of Oscar Wilde, at least in this book, is very heavily steeped in romanticism, aestheticism. And Basil is, like, the picture of an artist. When you read very romantic or aesthetic books, not in the modern sense of romance as in falling in love with someone. So when you think of the romanticized idea of an artist, it is someone who is a recluse and becomes obsessed with their painting, and it's that type of, Basil embodies the romantic idea of an artist. So Basil is a good guy, and he was actually originally friends with Lord Henry, and is the way Dorian Gray meets Lord Henry, but Basil does not let what Lord Henry says influence him, whereas Dorian Gray very much allowed Lord Henry to influence him. So Lord Henry, like I said, is just moral enough where he's still in high social standing. His reputation isn't tarnished, but he speaks all of these philosophical things, and it's like he talks about doing immoral things, but he never really does them. And he talks about how they really don't matter, and you can just live life however you want, and it doesn't matter. So Dorian takes what he says to heart and acts on it, whereas Lord Henry is all talk, all bark and no bite, to use the term. Now, before I get into the plot, I'll talk about that later. Let me just go ahead and get into the background of Oscar Wilde and of this book. So I'm going to repeat a lot of what I said in Reading Books I DNF'd for anyone who has not seen that video. If you don't want to go back, I'm not going to make you just because you want to read this book. I'll just re-say it. And if you watch the video, I'm sorry. But when I began reading this book, I knew nothing of the story, knew nothing of Oscar Wilde. I just knew that in this book, this guy gets a picture, something weird happens with the picture, and that's about it. And I knew nothing, once again, of Oscar Wilde. So I began reading this book because on Fable, which is an app that I use to keep track of all the books I read and everything, I joined a classics book club. I thought it would be cool to join a book club, but a lot of them were not my taste, and I couldn't be fully sure that all the books I was reading was going to be okay. So I joined a classics one, and this is the first book that I have read with that book club. And the way the book club is set up, you can comment on every single chapter if you want to. So I would read a chapter of the book and then read the comments. And as I was reading some of the comments, I was seeing people talking about how the book had very obvious homosexual themes. They would say that Lord Henry was obviously, Lord Henry was married, but they were saying that he was obviously not in love with his wife and had relationships with other men, which in the book, Lord Henry does talk about how him and his wife are not close, and they just kind of do whatever they want, and they don't really even see each other every day. But it said nothing of Lord Henry having relationships with other men. I did not see that while I was reading the book. And they were also saying stuff about Oscar Wilde. Now, I had also heard some things about Oscar Wilde before reading this book. But I didn't fully believe them because I've seen instances of people reading into people in history and where there's really no evidence. So I didn't believe that. So I did know that little bit about Oscar Wilde before, but I kind of wrote it off. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I even remembered it when I picked up this book until I started seeing the comments. I can't remember. But I did some research, and I learned that Oscar Wilde, although he was married and did have children, he also did indeed have a relationship with another man, and was even in prison for it, because during the Victorian era, this book was released in like 1890 something. He was in prison for it because it was very illegal at the time. And I learned that the book faced backlash when it was first published, but I did not see anything about any homosexual themes. I saw that people were saying that the book had no point, and that prompted Oscar Wilde to write the preface in this book, which is like a page long, and it just is basically like a poem. And it's talking about how an artist can create beautiful things and it doesn't have to have a point. And a writer can write whatever they want, and it can just be art for the art's sake. Nothing has to have a point, this, that, and the other. So, as I said in the DNF video, I kind of took it as Oscar Wilde saying, I can write whatever I want to, and it doesn't have to have a point. Because, like, people just didn't like your book because it didn't have a point. So that's all that I saw. So I continued reading the book. But since seeing all of the comments of other people, when I was reading the book, I began looking for those themes that people were reading into, because I was reading it and I was like, no, this book doesn't have that in it. I don't see it. At least not, like, definitely not as early on as people were commenting about. But as I kept reading it, I saw 2 to 3 possible instances of hints to homosexuality, but nothing overt. Like, it could go either way. So, like I said, this book is very heavily steeped in romanticism and aestheticism. And, like, Oscar Wilde, to the point that Oscar Wilde even wrote one whole chapter talking about how Dorian Gray went from being interested in embroidery and how embroidery was so beautiful and took so long to do, and it was like, it went into like why it is such an art form. And then the next month he was into gems, and he thought that like the process of mining and shining and cutting these gems just made them so beautiful. And like, he literally spent a whole chapter just talking about interests and finding beauty and art in everyday things. So keep that in mind. Oscar Wilde's writing is very flowery and romantic. So just keep that in mind. There was a conversation between two characters, Dorian Gray and another. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. There was a conversation, because this is something you learn about very early on in the book, but it's when Basil confesses it to Dorian that it kind of feels a bit odd, at least to me. Basil basically admits to Dorian how Basil was so obsessed with Dorian while creating his picture, and confesses all that. And that was one of the moments where I was like, okay, maybe you could see it, but at the same time, in my opinion, Basil was the embodiment of like a romantic artist. The romantic idea of an artist is that they become so obsessed with the thing that they're painting every time they paint that that's all that they live for and breathe. Now, I will say, if you do decide to read the censored version as I did, and you get to that point, by that point I was seeing people's comments, so that's why I was like, okay, I could see it either way. Like, if I hadn't heard those comments, I probably would have wrote it off as it just being very romantic writing on Oscar Wilde's part. So there was that. There's another situation where Dorian meets with an old friend who he actually kind of like ruined the guy's reputation. And people were also saying that them two were in a relationship. The book says nothing about that. As far as I read, I will be honest, as much as I've read, I'm not always the best at reading between the lines. So if y'all read that, if you read the censored version and you think I'm just stupid because I didn't get it, I'm sorry. I probably am. But I definitely didn't see it in that situation. Now, Lord Henry, also, some people were saying stuff about him, how he was interested in Dorian Gray. And Lord Henry does definitely say some weird things about Dorian, or think some weird things about Dorian. But once again, he's a bad guy. And he kind of enjoyed the fact that Dorian Gray was, at the very beginning at least, he kind of enjoyed the fact that Dorian Gray was starting to become this immoral person, or doing these very little immoral things. Like, Lord Henry enjoyed messing with Dorian and enjoyed saying these philosophical things about sin and immorality, and then watching Dorian fully believe it. So anyways, I'll quit rambling because I don't think I'm actually getting across what I really want to. Now, also, I want to say that even though there were a few instances where if you're looking for it, maybe you can see those themes, I thought it could go either way. Okay, I started rambling, so I'm just going to leave that there and hope y'all got my point out of that. Now, I also want to say that once I started reading the comments, I started looking for those themes in the book. But in the back of my mind, kind of playing like the other side of it was, oh, well, during the Victorian era, when this book was released, homosexuality was very looked down upon, and it was very illegal. And if you were caught having relations with someone of the same sex as you were in prison for it. So I was thinking the whole time, Oscar Wilde would not include that in his books. It was looked down upon at the time. It was illegal. I didn't think the book would be published because of how looked down upon it was. But apparently I was wrong. So then when I got close to the end of the book, like I think I had 2 to 4 chapters left, I did even more research. And this is what I found. So all of the sources, everything I'm about to say came from either, it was all online, Britannica, Wikipedia, or Medium.com. I'm not sure what Medium.com is. It's either a blog or like an online magazine of some sort. I know Wikipedia is not the most trustworthy, but I did use it. So I found that the Picture of Dorian Gray was actually first published in a magazine or a paper, and the publisher actually edited out a lot of the overt hints of romantic attraction between male characters. I don't even know what male characters I didn't learn any of that. Even with that censorship, the Victorian society still kind of like sniffed out some of the themes that were in the original story. Now, mind you, the uncensored version had only 13 chapters. So I don't know what all that book, that version talked about. So I don't know how much he could have edited out, and if you could still sniff out the themes. I really don't know. But the book still, even with the publisher censoring some of it, the book still gained some outlash. So Oscar Wilde at some point rewrote the story, added more chapters, which turned into the 20 chapter censored version that I read. And I read online that the uncensored version was only released in 2011, from what I've seen. Now, I'll be honest, that's very recent. So it may have been talking about only in England or Britain or whatever you call it, the UK, where Oscar Wilde was. It could have been released sooner in the US, now that I'm thinking about it. Like 2011 is kind of soon, and I think I remember seeing something, I didn't write it down, where the uncensored version was released in the United States and somewhere else. So I don't know. It said 2011, but it didn't say like where, if it was like everywhere. I don't know. Anyways, but I read the censored version because I read 20 chapters of the book. So like I said, the book still faced backlash despite the first edits, because the book described immoral themes and promotion of aestheticism over traditional Christian morality, even though Dorian Gray was very clearly the bad guy in the whole book, at least in the censored version. Not sure about the uncensored version. And those themes were portrayed as bad. Everything that Dorian Gray did is portrayed as bad. It's not really hyped up and glorified, other than like with the style that Oscar Wilde is writing in. But even then, like, when you're reading the book, you know Dorian Gray is a bad guy. So, like I said, the first publishing of the book was in 1891, and the book was actually used against Oscar Wilde in 1895, in his case with, I forget what the, like, exact wording they used, but he had a relationship with another man, and he was tried and convicted for it. I'm assuming they use the uncensored version because, like I said, this version, the censored version, does not have any overt hints at relationships between male characters. So, I don't really know. I feel like I conveyed all of that better the first time in the reading books I DNF'd. But there's that. While I was reading the book, like I said, there were some instances of weird things being said by Lord Henry, or the conversation between Basil and Dorian, but it was nothing that was like overtly like, oh, he liked that guy, like this guy liked that guy in a romantic way. So as far as the censored version goes, I did not see those themes until I like read the comments, and I was kind of looking for it at that point. So it's confirmed the uncensored version, the original version with 13 chapters, did have homosexual themes. But in the 20 chapter version, I did not really see it. Like I said, there were a few instances where it could go either way. And there were a few times, even at the beginning, when it was talking about Basil and how, like, once he met Dorian, he did kind of become obsessed with him because Dorian was beautiful. Dorian was very good looking. It talks about that at the beginning of the book, how he was a very handsome person, and that's why Basil wanted to paint his picture. So that was a bit odd when I was reading it. I was like, okay, but once again, I was writing it off as the writing of Oscar Wilde and how everything in life was, everything was so romanticized. But anyways, so let me get into my personal review of the book. Once again, because I read the censored version, I did not originally see all of those themes. So take all of that background knowledge away, and I'm just gonna tell y'all my personal review of the plot and the writing. Looking at only the plot and the writing, I did like the book. I liked the plot of the book. I liked that the book explored the consequences of living wholly for your own pleasures and desires. Dorian quickly descends into this immoral person who cares nothing for anyone else. There are several examples of him ruining people and their reputation. Slight spoiler, I'll put a time on the screen to skip to if you want, no spoilers whatsoever. But one person becomes an opium addict and like is living in an opium den in like the country. Someone who used to be in the high society in London, and 2 people kill themselves because of Dorian and what Dorian did to them. And that's not even touching the things that Dorian himself did. And there are several more deaths as a result of Dorian. Those are just like the closest ones. Now I also like how the book warns about letting certain people influence you. Dorian was influenced by Lord Henry Wotton, who was essentially the one who sent him down this long spiral into immorality. It's not fully Lord Henry's fault. Dorian was not forced, and Dorian allowed his ideas to influence him, but also Lord Henry was the one who like spoke those ideas. And very early on in the book, you even see how Lord Henry tells Dorian something and then just sits back and like laughs because Dorian has like this existential crisis. I think this is in like chapter like 2 or something. So Lord Henry enjoys speaking things that bother other people and then watching that person be bothered by it. He's not a good person. I don't like him. Now, Basil, on the other hand, the artist, was a better influence. And if Dorian had listened to him, all of those things might not have happened. And I think it's a good, like, Basil was a good person. Lord Henry was a bad person. And it was kind of like a fight, at least in the beginning, between Basil like choosing who to spend his time with, and he chose Lord Henry, and we see where that got him. Anyways, now like I said, Basil was initially friends with Lord Henry, but Basil did not let the things that Lord Henry said influence him, which is why Basil remained a good person. Now I also love that with each sin Dorian commits, he has a choice. And it's a visible choice, showing that each time Dorian was in complete control of what he chose to do. Just how every time you sin, you choose to do it. If you reach a point you feel you can't turn back, which is something that happened to Dorian a few times, or at least you could look at it that way, such as lying. I want to clarify what I'm about to say. If you reach a point you feel you can't turn back, it is because you've chosen several times to get there. So let me explain, because that can sound bad right off the bat. So you know how when someone lies, they do a little lie, but then somebody tries to come back and like, oh, but I thought this happened. And then they have to like lie again to make the first lie seem like the truth. And you keep going down and down and down and spiraling until there's this big web of lies. In order to get to the end of that, you had to lie, a little white lie, like we like to call them, first. And that happens with several things. If you want to talk about murder, there are crimes of passion, but even then, sometimes people are like in the wrong anyways. Like if you're mad at somebody, don't show up to their house and yell at them, because it might not turn out good if you are hot-headed and you have anger issues. With premeditated murder, you choose to continue to stay mad about whatever it is you're mad about. However you think that person wronged you, you continue to think about it until you reach the point where you want to kill them, which is insane. But anyways, with anything like that, big wrong things like that, it often starts with a small wrong thing. And Dorian does start out with smaller wrong things. The first big thing that happens to him is actually a really big thing, but as far as Dorian's actual involvement in it was kind of small in a way, and he does initially feel remorseful the first time, but he chooses to not be remorseful anymore. He chooses to not dwell on that thing, which in that situation he probably should have dwelled on it. Now, saying all of that, you never really reach the point where you're too far gone. You can always turn to God. Just a little PSA. You can always turn to God and ask him for forgiveness, whatever you've done. Now, if it's bad enough where there's legal consequences, sure, you may still have to face those legal consequences. You reap what you sow, but in God's eyes, you're forgiven. So I just want to put that out there. But in this book, Dorian eventually gets to a point where even if he wanted to turn around and do better, he kind of felt like he couldn't. Now, this book does talk a lot about sin and immorality. This book is not a religious book. During the Victorian era, religion was a very big thing. As I read earlier, it said that a lot of the backlash the book received, even after the censorships, was that it placed aestheticism over Christian morality. And during the Victorian era, religion, being moral, trying to be a good person was a really big deal. And the book does reflect those societal views, but it's not a religious book. And that is all I have written down. So, like I said, I think I kind of went over the background of this book a lot better and explained it a lot better in that video. I hope I at least got across my view here. If you're still confused, maybe go back and skip to that point. This is the first book that I read in the video, so you won't have to skip far. But yeah, that is it for the review, I think. Just to recap, I did enjoy the plot of the book. I think Oscar Wilde was not trying to glorify Dorian Gray and the sins, the immoral things that he was doing, but so I kind of liked reading about how one thing led to another, and the ending of the book was quite interesting, I thought. So it wasn't a bad book. The uncensored version, like I said, I didn't even really see any of the themes that the uncensored version had. So do with that what you will. I did enjoy the plot of this book, and that's initially why I picked it up the first time. I explained that in the reading books I DNF'd, or not picked it up, I did DNF it. It was just because I wasn't in the mood for it at the time, but the summary sounded very interesting, and that's why I initially tried to read it. It just wasn't really what I was in the mood for. So the plot alone, I really enjoyed it. Okay, so that's the end for the review. Really quick, I'm not doing a plot summary, but I'm going to explain a little bit more the plot of the story that would be a little bit spoiler-ish for some people. So if you don't want to watch the spoilers for this book, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. And for those who want to listen to the slight spoilers, let's get into it. This is not going to be horrible spoilers. It's just going to be like touching on little things here and there. So in this book, Basil meets Dorian Gray and finds Dorian Gray very handsome and wants to paint his portrait. So he does, and Dorian is given the portrait because it is a portrait of himself. And Lord Henry says something to him about youth and beauty, and Dorian kind of speaks out and says, oh, if only the portrait would get older and I wouldn't. And they really think nothing of it from then. Shortly after, Dorian does something bad and immoral, and he does initially feel bad for it. He goes to bed that night, wakes up the next morning, feels really bad about it. He hurt someone, so he goes to write a letter to that person apologizing, and he happens to see his portrait, and he thinks the portrait's changed. Now, it could be in his head, but it looks like the smile has changed ever so slightly to look a little bit more cruel than it did before. So he's writing this letter, and he doesn't get to send it, but Lord Henry comes to see him and tells him about how he shouldn't feel sorry for what he did to the person because he wasn't in the wrong, this, that, and the other, whatever. Lord Henry just generally being a bad person, honestly. And Dorian listens to him. I think it's at that point in the book that it kind of skips ahead a few years and just talks about how Dorian is still very high in society, But there's starting to be rumors floating around that Dorian is not a good person. And there's a lot of people in this high society in London. I believe they're in London. Sorry, the dogs are panting. I just took them outside. It's very hot today. But it might be an aristocrat's son that hung out with Dorian for a time, and then him and Dorian had a falling out, and now the son has fallen from grace. But Dorian is seemingly untouched by this reputation being tarnished. And there's several instances of this. And Basil even comes to him one day and is like, hey, all of these people that you've been friends with, their reputations are ruined, and people are saying that you're the cause of it all, but a man's sins will show on his face. And like, we learned that all these years later, like 5 years later, Dorian looks the exact same. He still looked just as youthful as he did when the picture was painted. And Basil says, I don't believe it of you, because they still remain friends, although Dorian and Lord Henry were closer. Basil's like, I don't believe it, because if you are doing these horrible things, it would show on your face, but you seem to not have aged at all. And we learn that through like Dorian's inner monologue, that his narrative, that everything that he does shows up in the picture. He even hides the picture away in a room in his house that only he has a key to, and he'll go to it and look at it, and it's just turned into this horrible, ghastly, like, it's the face and the hands are wrinkled, and there's a cruel smile, and it just looks very ugly and very old and very evil. And there were a few times of Dorian thinking about trying to be better and trying to be a better person, and him wondering if the picture would also start looking better if he were to be a good person, but it never really sticks. Until, this is skipping ahead a lot, until the end of it, he tries to kill the painting by cutting it open. And I think that may have been like maybe the point of him wanting to turn around and do better. I honestly can't remember. I only finished the book like a week or two ago, and I already can't remember exactly his reasoning behind it. I think it was because he was so tortured by the picture, and how the picture basically reflected his soul and reflected every sin that he had ever committed. So that is essentially the story. I left out a lot of big things because if you do decide to read the books, I cannot express the like plot twist in this book and how it makes you feel when you read them. Background aside, this book was really good. Some of the chapters, as far as Oscar Wilde's writing, was a bit too flowery for my taste, and was a bit to trudge through. But as far as the plot, I really did enjoy it. It's definitely a book that I would pick up just from the summary, background aside. So yeah, I think that is it for the video. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed the video. I'm sorry there won't be a plot summary if anyone is upset about that. I doubt it, but just in case, I'm sorry. I just don't feel like it, if I'm being honest. And would just be a hard book to do a plot summary for. I just tied it up real nicely there at the end of this video in a few minutes, and I wouldn't want to give away any of the plot twists and the big things that happen in this book, because the really big things are so few and far between, it feels like. But the satisfaction of the plot twist was nice. And it feels weird saying that because most of the plot twists were bad things that happened to people because of Dorian. But with it being a classic, I wasn't expecting there to be any big things that happen, because in the few classics that I have read, I love classics. I just haven't read as many as I wish I have, and I'll put it this way, this has been a different one. Out of all the classics I have read, this has been different, for sure. So, yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. I've rambled too much, and I hope y'all understood a morsel of what I said. Anyways, that's it. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and I cannot wait to